Julian Vance commanded his world from a throne of glass and steel, 48 stories above the ceaseless thrum of the city. His penthouse was a monument to minimalist precision, a sterile space of white marble and chrome where the only warmth came from the glow of stock tickers on a wall-sized screen. He was a titan of industry, the chief executive officer of Vance Global, a man who traded in futures and acquisitions, not feelings. His life was a meticulously curated series of victories, each one adding another layer of insulation between him and the messy, unpredictable chaos of human connection. Just that morning, he had finalized a merger worth billions, a move that would cement his legacy in the annals of finance. He felt a familiar, fleeting surge of triumph, a ghost of satisfaction that vanished as quickly as it appeared, leaving behind the usual void. He was staring out at the sprawling metropolis, a kingdom he had conquered but could not feel, when his private line chirped. It was a number no one had used in years, a relic from a past he had systematically dismantled. He almost ignored it, his thumb hovering over the decline button, but some inexplicable impulse made him answer. He expected a misdial, a telemarketer who had stumbled upon a digital ghost. "Hello?" he said, his voice clipped and impatient. The voice on the other end was small, fragile, and trembling with a desperate urgency. "Please, you have to help. Mommy fell down and she won't wake up." Julian frowned, annoyed at the intrusion. "This is a private number. Kid, you have the wrong one. You need to call emergency services." "I tried." The little girl sobbed, her voice cracking. "I tried the number on the red sticker, but I couldn't remember it all." This was the only other number in her wallet. She called it her just-in-case number. She said a prince gave it to her. The words hung in the sterile air of the penthouse, utterly alien. Prince. The term was so absurd, so out of place in his world of brutal negotiations and calculated risks. He was about to hang up, to dismiss it as a childish mistake, when the girl spoke again, her voice a near whisper. "My mommy's name is Amelia Reed. She's wearing the locket you gave her. The one with the flower on it." Amelia Reed. The locket. Time stopped. The city below blurred into a meaningless smear of light and shadow. The billion-dollar merger, the stock tickers, the entire edifice of his life dissolved in an instant. It was as if a fault line had cracked open the marble floor of his penthouse, revealing a past he had buried under a mountain of wealth and ambition. Amelia, the artist with paint on her fingers and a laugh that could make wildflowers grow in the cracks of a city pavement. The woman he had loved with a fierce, reckless passion he had never known before or since. The woman his family, and his own cowardice, had forced him to leave behind. What did you say your name was?" Julian breathed, his voice suddenly raw. The corporate titan stripped away to reveal the terrified man beneath. "Lily," she sniffled. "My name is Lily. Lily, the flower on the locket. A single, stylized silver lily. It was a custom piece he had commissioned, a one-of-a-kind symbol of a love he had told himself was just a youthful indiscretion." He stumbled back, his hand flying to his mouth. He felt the cold shock of realization spread through him, a terrifying, undeniable certainty that froze the blood in his veins. "Daddy, is that you?" the little girl asked, her voice filled with a desperate, heartbreaking hope. "Mommy said you were her once-upon-a-time prince. Are you coming to help us?" The phone in his hand suddenly felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. He couldn't speak. He couldn't breathe. The connection crackled and then went dead, leaving only the sound of his own ragged breathing in the cavernous silence of his perfect, empty life. He stood frozen, the phone slipping from his numb fingers and clattering onto the marble floor, the sound echoing the shattering of his entire world. The city lights twinkled below, oblivious. His prior concerns, his victories, his entire identity had become meaningless ash in the face of a single 6-year-old voice on a forgotten phone line. The penthouse, once a symbol of his power, now felt like a cage. Julian paced the length of the vast living room, the city lights a dizzying, mocking panorama outside the floor-to-ceiling windows. Amelia, Lily, the names echoed in the hollow chambers of his heart, a space he had long thought vacant. The carefully constructed walls around his emotions were crumbling, brick by painful brick. He had spent a decade building an empire, believing legacy was forged in boardrooms and measured in stock points. Now, he understood it might be measured in scraped knees and bedtime stories he had never been there to read. He strode into his private study, a room even more austere than the rest. He keyed a code into a discreet panel on the wall, and a section of polished mahogany slid away to reveal a heavy steel safe. Inside, beneath velvet trays of heirloom watches and stacks of bearer bonds, was a simple wooden box. His fingers trembled as he lifted it out. He hadn't opened it since the day he had chosen his inheritance over his heart. He lifted the lid. The faint scent of dried lavender and old paper filled the air. There she was in a faded photograph. Amelia, smiling at him, her eyes bright with a love and trust he had betrayed. Her hair was a wild cascade of curls, a stark contrast to the sleek, severe hairstyles of the women in his current orbit. Beside the photo was a small, empty, ring-sized velvet box. It was meant to hold the locket, the twin to the one she apparently still wore. He had kept this box as a secret penance, a reminder of the one authentic thing he had ever thrown away. He remembered their last conversation, the pressure from his father, the cutting words from his sister, Eleanor, about duty and propriety. He had told Amelia it was over, that their worlds were too different. He had walked away, convincing himself it was for the best, a clean break. He had been a fool. His personal phone, the one he used for his inner circle, buzzed on the desk. He glanced at the caller ID, Eleanor. He let it ring, the sound grating on his frayed nerves. She would be calling about the merger, about the celebratory dinner, about maintaining the Vance family's pristine public image. The superficiality of it all was suffocating. He finally answered, his voice flat. "Julian, darling, where have you been?" Eleanor's voice was crisp and polished, like fine china. "The board is ecstatic. Father is already planning the press release. We need to schedule the gala to announce the new philanthropic wing. It's all about legacy, Julian. Our legacy." "Something's come up, Eleanor," he said, the words feeling like gravel in his mouth. "Nothing is more important than this," she insisted, a hint of steel beneath the silk. "Don't tell me you're getting sentimental again. Remember what happened last time you let your guard down with that artist? It nearly cost you everything." Her dismissive tone, the way she spat the word artist, ignited a fresh spark of rage in him. She had never seen Amelia as a person, only as a threat to their social standing. He ended the call without another word, the fury clarifying his thoughts. He needed to find them. He needed to know. He picked up another phone, a secure line, and dialed a single number. "Marcus," he said, his voice now cold and hard as diamond. "I need you to do something for me. Off the books. Absolute discretion." Marcus Thorne had been his head of security for 15 years, a man of unflinching loyalty and formidable competence. "Of course, Mr. Vance. What do you need?" "I need you to find a woman," Julian said, his gaze fixed on Amelia's photograph. "Her name is Amelia Reed. Last I knew, she lived in the arts district downtown, but that was a decade ago. She might have a daughter, a little girl named Lily. I need to know where they are. I need to know if they're safe. And Marcus, I need to know now." The urgency in his own voice surprised him. He was a man who planned in quarters and fiscal years, but now all that mattered was the next hour. Less than 60 minutes later, Marcus called back. The speed of the reply was a testament to his efficiency, but the information he delivered was a hammer blow. "I found them, sir," Marcus said, his voice unusually somber. "It wasn't easy. They're not in the arts district anymore. They're on the other side of the river in the old industrial sector. The building is, well, sir, it's slated for demolition." Julian felt his stomach clench. "What else?" "Amelia Reed has no registered employment, but neighbors say she works multiple under-the-table jobs. Cleaning, waitressing, anything she can get. There are medical records. Multiple hospital visits over the past few years for what's listed as severe exhaustion and malnutrition. The words were clinical, but they painted a brutal picture of struggle, of a mother sacrificing her own health for her child. The faint she had suffered wasn't random. It was the culmination of years of hardship. "The child?" Julian asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Lily Reed, age 6. No official school records. Seems to be homeschooled," Marcus reported. "Sir, there's one more thing. I'm sending a photo to your secure device now. It was taken by a public health nurse during a free vaccination drive last year." His phone chimed. Julian opened the image file, his heart pounding in his chest. And there she was, a small girl with a determined chin and a cloud of dark, curly hair. But it was her eyes that made the air leave his lungs in a single painful gasp. They were his eyes. The same shape, the same intense, startling shade of gray. They stared back at him from the screen, a living, breathing testament to the life he had abandoned. It was not a possibility anymore. It was a fact, as solid and as devastating as the city skyline outside his window. He had a daughter, and he had left her and her mother to starve while he built an empire of empty triumphs. The next morning, the sun rose over a city that felt alien to Julian. The familiar skyline, once a symbol of his dominion, now seemed to mock him with its indifference. He didn't call for his driver or his Bentley. He went to the garage himself and chose a nondescript sedan from the fleet, a car he hadn't driven in years. He shed his tailored suit for simple jeans and a dark gray sweater, an armor of anonymity. Driving himself across the bridge, away from the glittering spires of the financial district and into the crumbling, forgotten neighborhoods of the industrial sector, felt like crossing into another dimension. He found the address Marcus had given him. The building was even worse than he had imagined. It was a grim, soot-stained brick tenement, its windows like vacant eyes. A faded, water-damaged notice from the city was plastered near the door, declaring the structure unsafe for habitation. His stomach churned with a mixture of guilt and fury. This was where they lived. This was the world he had condemned them to with his silence. He parked down the street, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were white. He needed a way to get inside, a way to see them without revealing the cataclysmic truth of his identity. Then he saw it, a handwritten sign taped to the inside of the lobby door. Water heater still broken. Landlord useless. An idea, desperate and insane, began to form in his mind. He spent 2 hours and a significant amount of money making it happen. A call to Marcus, a quiet word with the building's disgruntled, absentee landlord, and a visit to a hardware store. By noon, Julian Vance, billionaire CEO, was standing outside the door of apartment 3B, dressed in a plausible set of work coveralls, holding a toolbox. He knocked, his heart hammering against his ribs. The door opened a crack, and a pair of wary, intelligent gray eyes peered out at him. It was Lily. She was smaller than in the photograph, her face smudged with a bit of dirt, but her gaze was direct and unervingly perceptive. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone more like a tiny security guard than a 6-year-old. I'm here about the water heater," Julian stammered, his voice sounding foreign to his own ears. "The landlord sent me." The door opened wider. A woman stood behind Lily, her hand resting protectively on her daughter's shoulder. It was Amelia. She was thinner than he remembered, with exhaustion etched into the fine lines around her eyes, but the fierce, proud set of her jaw was the same. Her gaze was suspicious, guarded. "We didn't call anyone today," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "It was a building-wide complaint," Julian improvised, his mind racing. He's finally getting around to it. He saw the bareness of their tiny apartment over her shoulder. A threadbare rug, a small table with 2 chairs, and shelves made of stacked crates. He saw them sharing a single plate with a sandwich cut in half. The sight was a physical blow, driving the air from his lungs. This was their life. A shared sandwich in a condemned building, while he dined on catered lunches in his sky-high office. The guilt was a living thing, coiling in his gut. Amelia hesitated, then reluctantly let him in. He spent the next hour in their small bathroom, making a show of working on the ancient, rusted water heater he had already arranged to have replaced entirely the next day. But his real focus was on listening. He heard Lily chattering away to her mother, her vocabulary surprisingly advanced. He heard the quiet, patient way Amelia spoke to her. There was so much love in that tiny, impoverished space. It was a real home, more real than his sterile penthouse would ever be. He emerged, wiping his hands on a rag. "Should be good for now," he lied. "I'll have to come back with a new part tomorrow." He needed an excuse to return. As he was packing his tools, his eyes fell on a small, cluttered shelf beside the door. Among a few worn books and a collection of smooth river stones, there was a small, framed photograph. It was faded and curled at the edges, but he recognized it instantly. It was a picture of him and Amelia, taken on a boardwalk a lifetime ago. He was younger, his smile unforced, his arm wrapped around her as she laughed into the camera. He looked happy. He looked alive. Lily, who had been watching him silently, padded over to his side. She followed his gaze to the photograph. She looked from the picture to his face, her head tilted in concentration. A flicker of recognition crossed her features. "You look like him," she said, her small voice cutting through the quiet room. She pointed a tiny finger at the man in the photo. "You look like Mommy's prince." Julian froze, the toolbox handle slipping in his sweaty palm. He felt Amelia's eyes on him, her previous suspicion hardening into a sharp, dawning awareness. The air grew thick with unspoken history, with the weight of a decade of secrets. He had wanted to enter their world, and he had succeeded. But in doing so, he had walked directly into the path of a truth that was about to detonate. "Who are you?" Amelia asked, her voice low and trembling, not with fear, but with a gathering storm of anger and betrayal. "Who are you, really?" The carefully constructed persona of the handyman evaporated, leaving Julian Vance standing exposed and defenseless in the ruins of the life he had created. He opened his mouth to answer, but no words came out. He was trapped between the lie he had just told and the devastating truth he had hidden for 10 years. Lily's innocent observation had stripped him of his disguise, forcing him to face the woman he had wronged and the daughter he had never known. The quiet apartment, which moments before had felt like a sanctuary of love, now felt like a courtroom where he was the sole defendant, and the verdict was already in. The silence in the small apartment was a crushing weight. Amelia's question hung in the air, sharp and pointed. Before Julian could formulate a response, a loud, official-sounding knock echoed from the front door. Amelia, her eyes never leaving Julian's face, moved cautiously to open it. A man in a cheap suit stood in the hallway, holding a clipboard. He didn't even look at her. He just affixed a bright orange notice to the door. "Final eviction notice," he grunted. "Buildings condemned. You have 48 hours to vacate the premises." He turned and walked away without another word. Amelia stared at the notice, her face paling. The fight seemed to drain out of her, replaced by a wave of pure despair. "No," she whispered. "Not now. Where are we supposed to go?" She turned back to Julian, her suspicion now eclipsed by raw panic. Julian knew with a sickening certainty that this was not a coincidence. The timing was too perfect, too cruel. This had to be Eleanor. Suspicious of his sudden distraction, she must have had him followed. This eviction was not a bureaucratic delay. It was a targeted strike, designed to flush Amelia and Lily out, to remove the problem before it could tarnish the Vance name. The cold, calculated cruelty of it sent a jolt of ice-cold fury through him. "This isn't right," Julian said, his voice firm, shedding the last pretense of being a simple handyman. "Let me help." "Help?" Amelia's voice was laced with bitter irony. "Like you helped 10 years ago?" She finally looked at him, truly looked at him, and the recognition was complete. "It's you. It's really you, Julian." The dam of his composure broke. He had to know the whole truth. "Marcus," he said into his secure phone moments later, his voice tight with urgency. "Dig deeper. I want to know everything that happened after I left. I want to see letters, emails, bank statements. I need to know why I never heard from her. I suspect my sister is involved." While Marcus's team worked with silent, terrifying efficiency, Julian refused to leave Amelia and Lily. He couldn't. He arranged for them to be moved into a suite at a discreet residential hotel, a place so luxurious it made Amelia deeply uncomfortable. Lily, however, was fascinated by the plush carpets and the view from the window. Seeing her safe, watching her eat a full meal without having to share, sent a pang of simultaneous relief and profound shame through him. This was the life she should have always had. The next day, Marcus delivered a sealed envelope. Julian opened it in the hotel suite's adjoining room, his hands shaking. Inside was the proof of a conspiracy so cold and methodical it stole his breath. There were copies of more than a dozen letters Amelia had sent to his old address in the year after he left, all intercepted before they ever reached him. There were scans of checks from a Vance subsidiary, paid to a private maternity clinic, followed by a final, large payment to a discretionary fund at the hospital, effectively burying the record of Lily's birth. The architect of it all was clear. Every transaction was authorized by a single signature, Eleanor Vance. The final piece of the puzzle, however, came from Amelia herself. Julian, his face pale and grim, walked into the main room of the suite where she was sitting, watching Lily sleep. He didn't speak. He just laid the files on the table in front of her. She looked through them, her expression shifting from confusion to heartbreak, and then to a quiet, simmering rage. "I don't understand," she whispered, looking at the intercepted letters. "I wrote to you. I told you I was pregnant. I told you I just wanted you to know. I never asked for anything." "She made sure I never saw them," Julian said, his voice raw. "My sister." Amelia's eyes hardened as a memory surfaced. "Your sister," she said, her voice barely audible. "She came to see me, about 2 months after you left. She told me you were engaged, that you had moved on and wanted nothing to do with me or the baby. She said if I ever tried to contact you, she would use your family's power to ruin my life, to make sure I was painted as an unstable gold digger, and that I would lose my child the moment it was born. This was the missing piece, the direct threat, the lie that had severed their last connection. Julian finally understood the depth of Eleanor's treachery. It wasn't just about protecting the family. It was a personal, venomous crusade. He now had the evidence, and with Amelia's testimony, he had the motive. They had formed an unwitting alliance, bound by a shared enemy. Just then, Julian's phone rang. It was Eleanor. "Julian, I know where you are," she said, her voice dripping with condescending pity. "And I know who you're with. I have to say, I'm disappointed. I tried to handle this cleanly with the eviction, but you're forcing my hand." "What did you do, Eleanor?" Julian growled. "I'm just protecting this family. Something you seem to have forgotten," she purred. "A word to the right people at Child Protective Services about a homeless, unemployed mother living with a strange man in a hotel. I imagine they'd be very interested. For Lily's own well-being, of course. Tell your little friend to take the child and disappear. It's her last chance before things get truly unpleasant." The threat was no longer veiled. It was a direct, vicious attack on the one thing that now mattered more to him than anything else in the world: his daughter. The conflict had escalated beyond family drama into open warfare. Eleanor had just made the biggest mistake of her life. She had threatened his child. And in doing so, she had unleashed a side of Julian Vance that the corporate world had only ever seen glimpses of, a ruthless, implacable force that would now be directed entirely at her destruction. The battle for his legacy was no longer about money or power. It was about protecting his family. The rage that filled Julian was a white-hot, purifying fire. Eleanor's threat had burned away any last shred of doubt or hesitation. He knew exactly what he had to do. He ended the call, his hand steady, his mind crystalline in its clarity. He turned to Amelia, whose face was a mask of terror at the mention of Child Protective Services. "She will not touch you," Julian said, his voice a low, dangerous promise. "She will not get near Lily." This ends now. Without another word, he strode out of the hotel suite, the file of evidence clutched in his hand. He took the elevator straight to the garage, got into his car, and drove directly to the heart of his empire, the Vance Global Tower. He didn't bother with the public elevators, using his private keycard to access the express lift that went straight to the executive floor. He bypassed his own office and walked down the silent, opulent hallway to the corner office at the far end. Eleanor's office. He didn't knock. He pushed the heavy glass doors open with such force that they banged against the stoppers. Eleanor was on the phone, her back to him, looking out at the same skyline as his own office. She was laughing, a light, tinkling sound that made his skin crawl. "Don't worry," she was saying into the phone. "The situation is being managed. It will be a non-issue by tomorrow." "Hang up the phone, Eleanor," Julian said. His voice was quiet, but it cut through the room like a shard of ice. She spun around, startled. A flash of anger crossed her face at the intrusion, quickly masked by her usual polished composure. "Julian, what is the meaning of this? I'm in a very important call." "Not as important as this one," he said, walking to her vast, obsidian desk. He opened the file and let the contents spill across its pristine surface. The copies of Amelia's intercepted letters, the bank statements from the shell company, the payment records to the hospital. They fanned out like a damning hand of cards. Eleanor stared at the papers, her composure finally cracking. A flicker of genuine fear appeared in her eyes before being replaced by defiance. "Where did you get this? Does it matter?" Julian shot back. "You did this. You found her letters. You paid people off. You lied to her. You lied to me. You let me believe for 10 years that she simply vanished. You let my daughter grow up in poverty while you lectured me about our legacy." Cornered, Eleanor dropped the pretense. Her face twisted into a sneer of self-righteousness. "I did it for you," she hissed, rising from her chair. "I did it for this family." She was a nobody, a distraction. Can you imagine the scandal? Julian Vance, heir to the Vance fortune, having a child out of wedlock with some penniless artist? It would have destroyed everything our father built. "I protected you. I protected our name." That child would have been an anchor, dragging you down for your entire life. Her complete lack of remorse, her absolute conviction that her cruelty had been a noble act, was the final confirmation. She was morally bankrupt. The sister he thought he knew, the one he had protected and trusted, had never really existed. She was a stranger, a monster wearing his sister's face. Julian felt a profound, chilling calm settle over him. "You didn't protect me, Eleanor. You robbed me. You stole a decade of my daughter's life from me. You talk about legacy? Our father built an empire, yes, but you twisted his ambition into something ugly and rotten. You are not protecting the Vance name. You are the single greatest threat to it." He pulled out his phone and dialed his chief legal counsel. "David, I want you to draw up the paperwork immediately. I am invoking my majority shareholder rights to remove Eleanor Vance from the board of Vance Global, effective immediately. Terminate her employment, cancel her corporate accounts, and change the security protocols. She is no longer welcome in this building." Eleanor stared at him, aghast. "You can't do this. I am your sister." "No," Julian said, his voice devoid of all emotion. "You are just someone I used to know." He turned and walked away, leaving her standing amidst the evidence of her treachery, her world collapsing around her. His next stop was back at the hotel. He walked into the suite to find Amelia pacing nervously, her arms wrapped around herself. He went to her, his expression softening for the first time that day. He took her hands in his. "It's over," he said quietly. "She can't hurt you anymore." He then sat down and told her everything. He explained the full extent of Eleanor's deceit, the lies she had told him, the web she had spun to keep them apart. He didn't make excuses for his own past cowardice. He owned it completely. "I should have fought for you," he said, his voice thick with regret. "I was a coward, and I let my family's expectations dictate my life. I will spend the rest of my days trying to make that right." He looked over at Lily, still sleeping peacefully in the other room, oblivious to the storm that had just raged around her. "I am making a commitment to you, Amelia," he said, his gaze meeting hers. "And to her. I will protect you. I will provide for you. And if you'll let me, I want to be her father. Not just on a birth certificate. In every way that matters." Tears welled in Amelia's eyes, but they were not tears of fear or sadness. They were tears of profound, cathartic relief. The battle lines had been drawn. Julian had unequivocally chosen them, his new family, over the toxic legacy of his old one. Their alliance was now solidified, not just by circumstance, but by a shared promise for the future. The final act was yet to come, but for the first time in a decade, Amelia felt the ground beneath her feet was solid. They were in this together. Eleanor Vance was not one to be defeated quietly. Stripped of her power and position, she became a cornered animal, lashing out with the only weapon she had left: public perception. She scheduled a press conference at the prestigious hotel where the Vance Foundation was set to hold its annual charity gala. Her narrative was already leaking to the tabloids. A story of a brilliant, stable businesswoman being unjustly ousted by her volatile brother, who was suffering a mental breakdown under the influence of a manipulative, gold-digging woman from his past. She planned to paint herself as the victim, the steadfast guardian of the family legacy, and Julian as a man who had lost his mind. The ballroom was packed, cameras flashed, and reporters from every major news outlet jostled for position. Eleanor stood at the podium, the picture of wronged elegance, a carefully rehearsed look of concern on her face. "It is with a heavy heart that I must address these recent, troubling developments at Vance Global," she began, her voice resonating with false sincerity. "My brother Julian, a man I love dearly, is not himself. He is being influenced by outside forces that do not have his, or this family's, best interests at heart." Just as she was about to deliver her finishing blow, the grand doors at the back of the ballroom swung open. A hush fell over the room. Julian Vance walked in, not with the wild, unhinged look Eleanor had described, but with a calm, commanding presence. He was not alone. By his side, her head held high, was Amelia, and holding his other hand, looking at the crowd with wide, curious eyes, was Lily. Eleanor froze, her script forgotten. The sight of them together, a united, undeniable family, was a visual rebuttal more powerful than any statement she could have made. Julian walked them calmly to the front row, settled them in their seats with a tender, protective gesture, and then strode to the stage. He didn't shove her aside. He simply walked to the second podium, the one reserved for him, and waited for the stunned silence to give way to a cacophony of questions. "My sister is correct about one thing," Julian began, his voice amplified by the microphone, clear and steady. "This is about family, and it is about legacy." He looked directly at Eleanor, his gaze unwavering. "For 10 years I believed a lie constructed to keep me from the most important part of my life." He gestured to the front row. "That woman is Amelia Reed, a woman I loved and wrongly left. And this little girl is Lily, my daughter." Gasps and camera shutters filled the room. Julian raised a hand for silence. He didn't present the letters or the bank statements. He knew Eleanor would try to spin them. Instead, he delivered the one piece of information he had been holding back, the one twist that would utterly dismantle her entire motivation. "My sister has claimed she did all this to protect the Vance legacy, a legacy she felt was threatened," Julian continued, his voice ringing with authority. "What she has never told anyone is that her position within that legacy has always been conditional," he signaled to Marcus, who projected a document onto the large screens behind the stage. It was a scanned page from their father's original, unmodified will. "Our father, a brilliant but demanding man, nearly disinherited Eleanor 2 decades ago for her reckless behavior and what he called a fundamental lack of moral character. I was the one who personally intervened. I fought for her. I convinced him to give her a second chance. Her entire career, her wealth, her place in this company is a gift that I gave her. Her actions were not born from a desire to protect me. They were born from a deep, bitter resentment she has harbored for 20 years. The revelation was a stunning blow. It didn't just expose her conspiracy, it exposed her soul. It reframed her entire life's narrative from one of a loyal protector to that of a jealous, ungrateful saboteur. Eleanor stared at the document on the screen, her face ashen. Her carefully constructed facade shattered into a million pieces. All the reporters, all the cameras were now turned on her, capturing her public unmasking. The evidence of mail fraud, extortion, and financial misconduct has already been turned over to the district attorney's office, Julian stated coolly. As if on cue, two plainclothes detectives entered the ballroom and approached the stage. They spoke to Eleanor in low tones, and she simply nodded, defeated. The fire was gone from her eyes, replaced by a vacant, hollow look. She was escorted from the stage, her public downfall absolute and devastatingly complete, captured by dozens of cameras. Julian watched her go, not with triumph, but with a quiet, somber finality. Then he turned back to the room, his gaze finding Amelia and Lily. He walked off the stage, past the throng of clamoring reporters, and went directly to them. He knelt down in front of his daughter, ignoring the world around them. "It's okay," he whispered, shielding her from the flashing lights. He then stood, took Amelia's hand, and pulled them both into a protective embrace. The cameras flashed furiously, but the image they captured was not one of scandal. It was the portrait of a family, forged in secrets and lies, finally united in the harsh, clarifying light of truth. The king had reclaimed his kingdom, not of glass and steel, but of flesh and blood. His true legacy had just begun. 9 months later, the world of Julian Vance was unrecognizable. The sterile penthouse, with its cold marble and silent, panoramic views, had been sold. He now lived in a sprawling but warm country house an hour outside the city, a place with overgrown gardens, scuffed wooden floors, and the constant, joyful noise of a child's laughter. The wall-sized stock ticker had been replaced by a wall-sized corkboard covered in Lily's vibrant, chaotic paintings. A typical afternoon found Julian not in a boardroom, but on his hands and knees on a soft Persian rug in the living room. He was wearing a ridiculously paint-splattered sweater, attempting to help Lily build a model of the solar system for her school project. He, a man who had once orchestrated multi-billion-dollar corporate takeovers, was struggling to get Saturn's rings to stay attached with glue. "Daddy, you're putting it on upside down," Lily giggled, her gray eyes, his eyes, sparkling with amusement. She deftly took the planet from his hands and fixed it in seconds. "Right?" Julian chuckled, a sound that was now as natural to him as breathing. "Of course. You're the expert." He was a different man. The icy tension in his shoulders had melted away. The hard lines on his face had softened. He smiled easily and often. He had dismantled his old life with the same ruthless efficiency he had once applied to his business dealings. He had stepped down as CEO of Vance Global, taking a less demanding role as chairman of the board, a position that allowed him to be home every day by 4. He had discovered the simple, profound joy of being present, of reading bedtime stories and making pancakes on a Saturday morning. His greatest transformation, however, was in his use of the Vance fortune. He had completely overhauled the family's philanthropic arm. At a press conference 2 months prior, standing beside Amelia, he had announced its new mission and its new name. The Vance Foundation was now the Lily Reed Foundation, and its sole purpose was to fight for those who had been silenced and forgotten. Its first major project was a state-of-the-art facility offering free legal aid, temporary housing, and job training for single mothers facing intimidation and injustice. It was his final, most meaningful act of redemption, using the very resources Eleanor had tried to protect to undo the kind of harm she had inflicted. He was building a new legacy, one of hope and second chances. Later that evening, as dusk settled over the garden, Julian and Amelia sat on the porch swing, watching Lily chase fireflies on the lawn. A comfortable silence settled between them, the kind that only comes from navigating a storm and finding safe harbor together. Julian reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. It was the one he had kept in his safe for 10 years. He opened it and revealed the silver locket, the twin to the one Amelia wore. It gleamed in the fading light. He took her hand and placed the box in her palm. "I kept this," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. I think a part of me always knew it still belonged to you, that it was waiting for me to find my way back." Amelia opened her mouth to speak, but he gently shook his head, his gaze earnest and full of a love that was deeper and more real than anything he had ever known. "Amelia Reed," he said, his voice steady, "will you marry me? Will you do me the honor of letting me be your husband and Lily's father for the rest of our lives?" Tears streamed down Amelia's face as she nodded, a radiant smile breaking through. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, of course, yes." He slipped the locket's chain around her neck, its cool metal resting beside the one she already wore. Two halves of a whole finally reunited. Julian wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close as they watched their daughter, a tiny beacon of light dancing in the twilight. He thought of the empire he had built, the towers of glass and steel that reached for the sky. He realized now they were nothing more than empty monuments to a hollow ambition. For years, he had been chasing a legacy he could put his name on, when the only legacy that had ever truly mattered was right here, in the warmth of the woman beside him and the sound of his daughter's laughter filling the evening air.